The galaxy had a theory about humans, and it was wrong in all the right ways. Across 100 star systems, scholars of the Qu'lath consensus dissected Earth's history with the clinical fascination of xenobiologists probing a paradox. Here was a species that clawed its way out of primordial ooze only to nearly drown in its own blood, wars over borders, gods, and the shimmering lie of scarcity. Yet upon reaching the stars they sheathed their blades, no colony disputes, no resource skirmishes. To the Qu'lath, gelatinous philosophers who'd evolved beyond violence by shedding their skeletons, humanity's restraint was a moral revelation. Thesis papers bloomed in academic halls, Homo sapiens as galactic pacifists, their brutality outgrown like a larval exoskeleton. They did not understand. The truth lived in classified server farms and the smoke-stained jokes of veterans. Humans had not abandoned war, they'd perfected it. They'd learned the calculus of mercy, that some fires burned too hot to risk igniting, that survival sometimes wore the face of surrender. Earth's envoys smiled and signed treaties, their pockets heavy with terraforming codes and the coordinates of dead worlds. When the Qu'lath asked, ever so politely, why humanity demurred from conflict, diplomats replied with a shrug and a borrowed proverb, "Only fools rush into a storm." They did not mention the storms they'd created. Deep in the Sol archives, buried beneath layers of red tape, a single line of text glowed in the dark. Venusian atmospheric ignition protocol, status retired. No flags marked its retirement. No monuments. Just a grinning Marine's graffiti scrawled across the file, "Don't make us be nice." The galaxy had a theory. Soon it would meet the lab rats. Chapter 1, the halls of Qu'lath Prime glimmered like frozen starlight. Crystalline spires arched overhead, their facets refracting the muted blues and violets of the planet's twin suns into prismatic pools that rippled across the floor. Zoe Nguyen floated through it all, her boots magnetized to the drifting platforms that carried her deeper into the academic complex. The air tasted faintly of brine, a relic of the Qu'lath's oceanic origins, and every breath felt like swallowing the ghost of a sea she'd never visited. Around her the scholars moved with a grace that bordered on absurdity, gelatinous, translucent bodies pulsing gently as they navigated the zero-gravity chambers, trailing tendrils that shimmered like living auroras. To them this was a second womb. To Zoe it was a cathedral of alien logic, beautiful and brittle. She paused at the threshold of the lecture hall, her hand drifting to the grenade-shaped USB drive hanging from her neck. Its cold metal edges bit into her palm, a grounding counterpoint to the surreal calm of the Qu'lath. Focus, she told herself. Diplomat, not soldier. Words, not weapons. But the mantra felt hollow here, where every wall seemed to hum with the quiet judgment of a species that had scrubbed war from their genetic memory. Inside the debate had already begun. A Qu'lath scholar, Zoe mentally labeled it Professor Blue for the cerulean streaks in its mantle, hovered at the center of the amphitheater, its voice a resonant thrum that vibrated through the fluid-filled chamber. Humanity's ascension to the galactic accord, it intoned, is a testament to evolved pacifism. Their abstention from interstellar conflict suggests a species refined beyond primal territoriality. Zoe's jaw tightened. Primal territoriality. As if Earth's silence was a choice, not exhaustion. She remembered the Venusian trenches, the acrid stench of burning methane searing her lungs as her squad dragged her through the smoldering wreckage of their outpost. They called it the Turkey Shoot. We called it survival. A student, its bioluminescence flickering in eager pink, interjected. But their history is violent. How do we reconcile their past with this docility? Docility. The word slipped out before Zoe could stop it, sharp and low. A few nearby Qu'lath rippled, their tendrils recoiling at the sudden spike in her tone. Professor Blue's mantle flushed indigo, curiosity or warning. She stepped onto the central platform, the magnets in her boots clicking softly as she deactivated them, letting zero gravity take her. The Qu'lath parted around her like liquid, their forms undulating to avoid contact. Human solidity unnerved them. She'd learned that her first week, too much density, too much heat. You want to reconcile our history? She floated toward the hollow projector, her thumb brushing the grenade USB. The device was a stupid joke, really, a farewell gift from her squad after she'd mustered out. Take this, Zibom. Reyes had grinned, his face still smeared with soot from the siege of Ceres. Next time you negotiate, just flash it. They'll fold. She'd laughed then. Now it felt like a millstone. The projector flared to life at her touch, bathing the hall in sapphire light. She keyed in the declassified codes, her fingers trembling only slightly. This isn't a briefing room, these aren't generals, but the Qu'lath needed to see, needed to understand. The footage unfolded like a nightmare. Venus's amber skies, choked with rebel frigates, human terraformers, retrofitted into siege engines, pumping oxygen into the methane-rich stratosphere. Then the spark, a single tracer round, a flash of hellish orange, and suddenly the atmosphere itself was burning. Ships melted like wax, their hulls slowing away in molten ribbons. The Qu'lath began to shudder, their bioluminescence strobing panic white. One scholar's mantle ruptured, spewing viscous fluid into the water. Stress-induced apoptosis, their version of a heart attack. Zoe killed the feed. The silence that followed was thicker than the Qu'lath's brine air. We don't avoid war out of mercy, she said, her voice steady now, a sergeant addressing fresh meat. We avoid it because we're good at it. Too good. Professor Blue's mantle had darkened to near black. This is barbarism. No, she gripped the USB harder, the edges drawing blood. Barbarism is needing to do it twice. Nissa later in her quarters, a sparse cell of iridescent coral. Zoe stared at the grenade drive. The blood on her palm had dried to a rust-brown crescent. Reyes would have loved this, she thought, messing with the squid heads, playing boogeyman. But Reyes was dead, along with the rest of her squad, their names etched into the drive's encrypted core. A memorial masquerading as a toy. She activated it, the holographic names spilling out in flickering gold. Sergeant Alejandro Reyes, CBL. Mariko Voss, PVT. Jalen Cole, 23 in total. 23 reasons she'd traded her rifle for a negotiator's pin. A chime sounded, the liquid, bell-like tone of a Qu'lath visitor. Scholar Vink hovered at her threshold, his mantle a tentative lavender. Young for his species, she guessed. His tendrils still had the unmarked sheen of adolescence. Your demonstration, he pulsed, the translator at his collar converting subsonic vibrations to clipped English. It was not doctrine, not the human way. Zoe snorted. There's no human way, just people, scared people, mostly. Vink drifted closer, his gelatinous form rippling as he studied the holographic names. These are your fallen, my family. She waved a hand, and the names dissolved. The Qu'lath mourned collectively, right. Hive mind elegies or whatever. We recycle. His mantle flushed embarrassment yellow. The fallen rejoined the biomass. New life from old pain. Sounds efficient. She didn't hide the edge in her voice. You keep yours trapped in light. The observation startled her. She looked up, really looked, at the young scholar. His bioluminescence had stabilized to a soft periwinkle, not pity, but curiosity. The first Qu'lath who hadn't looked at her like a loaded gun. Light's all we have left, she said finally. That night the Qu'lath Senate voted unanimously to draft the Galactic Non-Provocation Pact. Zoe learned of it via a terse missive from EarthGov, restricted from summit participation pending psychological review. Maintain host relations. She stood at the observatory's edge, watching freighters glide through the nebulae-dusted void. Somewhere out there, Earth's envoys were scrambling to apologize, to explain, to soften the blow of her undiplomatic candor. Good luck, she thought. The Qu'lath had seen humanity's teeth. No amount of political groveling would make them unsee it. Vink found her there, his mantle streaked with uncharacteristic gray, anxiety, maybe. They fear you, he said. They should. No, they fear for you. Your species, you hold so much fire inside. How do you not combust? Zoe smiled faintly. We do, sometimes. She palmed the grenade drive, its weight suddenly unbearable. 23 names, a galaxy of ghosts. In the glass's reflection, her face looked older than it had any right to be. Come on kid, she said, turning abruptly. Let's find you a thesis topic. Vink followed, his bioluminescence flickering like a startled firefly. Above them, the stars burned cold and quiet, indifferent to the small fierce things learning to navigate the dark. Chapter 2. Qu'lath Prime's nights were not true nights. The twin suns dipped below the crystalline horizon in staggered intervals, casting the sky in perpetual twilight, a hazy indigo streaked with the faint glow of bioengineered algae that rippled across the atmosphere like celestial jellyfish. Zoe Nguyen often found herself staring at that alien aurora, its serene undulations a mockery of the tension gnawing at her bones. The Galactic Non-Provocation Pact had been ratified in a record 7 hours. Humanity, it seemed, had finally achieved interstellar notoriety, too dangerous to trust, too useful to exile. EarthGov's embassy was a squat, utilitarian structure grafted awkwardly onto the edge of the Qu'lath academic spires, a concrete tumor in a body of glass. Zoe paced its narrow corridors, her boots echoing against reinforced steel floors, designed to repel the delicate Qu'lath, who would never dare visit. The walls were lined with propaganda hollows, Earth's green zones, forests clawing back from nuclear ash. Lunar colonies, domes glittering like dewdrops, smiling diplomats, shaking tentacles with species Zoe couldn't name. None of the images showed Venus, none showed the Turkey Shoot. A priority communique blinked on her terminal. She already knew what it said. Remain neutral. Facilitate cultural compliance. Do not escalate. The same sanitized script EarthGov had been reciting since the Mars secession. She deleted it, the hologram dissolving into static that clung to her fingertips like cobwebs. Vink found her in the embassy's shadowed underbelly, where human engineers muttered over alien tech. The young scholar hovered at the periphery, his bioluminescence dimmed to a respectful teal. Qu'lath protocol for entering predator territory. Zoe watched him through the reflection of a dismantled atmospheric processor, its innards spilling copper wires in translucent Qu'lath fluid. They're calling it the Mercy Accords, she said. Not turning. Catchy, right? Vink's mantle flushed coral, a misnomer. Fear is not mercy. She almost smiled. The kid was learning. He drifted closer, tendrils curling around a floating toolkit. Your people, they comply, they're scared. Zoe plucked a hydrospanner from the air, its weight familiar, metallic. A relic of human engineering in a room of alien sleekness, scared of losing trade routes, scared of being alone again. She gestured to the processor. You know what this thing does? Scrubs anxiety pheromones from your air. Keeps your scholars calm. We bought the specs for 300,000 tons of lithium. Vink pulsed softly, a Qu'lath frown. You resent them. I resent the game. She tossed the spanner. It clattered against a bulkhead, sending engineers scattering. EarthGov licks its wounds while the Qu'lath write treaties about a species they've never understood. And I'm stuck here, babysitting a lighter. She flicked the silver Zippo from her pocket, its flame a tiny defiant sun. The attacks began subtly. A research outpost on Qu'lath Prime's southern ridge went silent. Then a neural archive hub, its gelatinous caretakers found desiccated, their bioluminescence leached to a sickly gray. The Qu'lath Senate dismissed it as systemic stress events, their term for suicide. Zoe knew better. She'd seen the footage from the archive hub's sensors, shadowy figures, humanoid but wrong. Their movements too fluid, joints bending in impossible directions. They'd injected something into the hub's nutrient lines, a compound that turned the Qu'lath's own neural networks against them. A bioweapon, tailored. The Clarity, they called themselves. Zealots who believed purity lay in erasing weakness, starting with pacifists. Vink brought her the data in secret, his mantle streaked with emergency red. They're targeting the nexuses, the hive mind archives. If they succeed, your history dies, your identity. Zoe stared at the hologram flickering above her desk, a Clarity operative, its face a blur of adaptive nanotech. You should have let EarthGov send Marines, and confirm every fear the Senate has. Vink's bioluminescence sputtered, a static-laced scream. We cannot violate the Accords. Zoe leaned back, the Zippo spinning on her palm. 23 names, a galaxy of ghosts. Rhea's voice snarled in her memory. You gonna diplomacy your way out of a firefight, Zibom. They're using your own systems against you, she said. Your neural networks are decentralized, right? No single hub to protect. Vink rippled, a Qu'lath nod. But the Clarity's toxin attacks our shared sensory protocols. It induces cascading panic. We cannot coordinate a defense when every mind is trapped in its own terror. Zoe's thumb paused mid-flick on the lighter. Cascading panic. She'd seen it before. Boot camp recruits freezing under simulated orbital bombardment, their brains short-circuiting from sensory overload. The cure had been brutal. Ice water hoses and sergeants screaming louder than the sirens. You need a counterpulse, she muttered. Something to override the fear. Our biology cannot withstand aggressive stimuli. Stress triggers apoptosis. Vink's tendrils nodded. We are not like you. No, she thought. You're better. They met in the abandoned terraforming lab, a cavernous dome on the edge of Qu'lath Prime's atmosphere where human and alien tech had once mingled in optimistic disarray. Now it was a graveyard of half-built dreams, skeletal drone frames, dormant methane harvesters, Qu'lath biopods shriveled like discarded fruit. Zoe's lighter cast long shadows on the walls, each flicker illuminating Vink's anxious lavender glow. This is a restricted zone, he pulsed, tendrils recoiling from a human workbench stained with old coffee rings. Good thing we're not here to sightsee. Zoe pried open a rusted control panel, her fingers dancing over outdated EarthGov codes. The system coughed to life, hollow screens blooming with schematics of the Venusian Turkey Shoot. Your people need a deterrent, something that doesn't require bullets. Vink drifted closer, his mantle reflecting the orange hellscape of burning methane. You would replicate this, not the slaughter, the spectacle. She zoomed in on the ignition sequence, a chain reaction of carefully timed sparks. Fear's a weapon if you let it be, but it's also a language. The Clarity speaks it fluently. She turned, the lighter's flame painting her face in stark relief. So we answer louder. Mears Worthgov's envoy arrived at dawn. Zoe watched from the embassy's rooftop as their shuttle descended, its hull emblazoned with the gilded olive branches of the Mercy Accords. Ambassador Cho, a career bureaucrat, with a smile like a scalpel, greeted the Qu'lath Senate with calibrated humility. Zoe's invitation had been lost in transit. She didn't need to hear the speeches. The script wrote itself. Apologies for her unfiltered candor, assurances of humanity's commitment to peace, veiled threats about shared resources. Cho's voice oozed through the embassy's speakers, syrup thick. We embrace the Accords not as surrender, but as evolution. Zoe killed the feed. Her quarters were dark, lit only by the grenade USB's holographic names. 23 flickering ghosts. Vink's chimes startled her. He pulsed urgency red, tendrils clutching a data crystal. The Clarity hit another hub. The Senate there evacuating the core archives. She stood, the USB's light glinting in her eyes. Then it's time. For what? To show them what evolved pacifism really looks like. Mears Wurst, the neural hub was a cathedral of living light. Qu'lath scholars floated in concentric rings around a central spiral pulsating biocrystal, their tendrils interlaced in a delicate web. Zoe's boots crunched over discarded nutrient sacks, the floor slick with evaporated fluid. The Clarity's toxin had left scars, blackened veins, spider webbing up the walls, the air reeking of burnt sugar. Vink hovered at her side, his bioluminescence muted by a stealth cloak. Her invention, cobbled from refugee tech and a thermal blanket. The counterpulse, if it fails. It won't, she hoped. The device was laughably crude, a repurposed terraformer ignition module, jury-rigged to emit a localized electromagnetic burst. No weapons, per the Accords, just a spark. She activated it. The hub erupted in light. Qu'lath scholars writhed as the pulse tore through their neural web, their bioluminescence flaring panic white. Vink screamed, a soundless subsonic wail that vibrated in Zoe's molars. But she held the trigger, counting seconds. 3, 4, 5. Then stillness. The scholars' mantles shifted, trembling at first, then steadying to a collective azure. The hive mind ringed it, strand by strand. Vink stared at her,
his mantle a storm of colors. You overloaded the toxin, burned it out. Fear can't survive fireworks, she said, sagging against a console. Her hands shook. The lighter felt heavier than a pistol. Near and Ambassador Cho's condemnation came swiftly. Reckless endangerment of Qu'lath's sovereignty, gross violation of the Accords. Zoe's recall order blinked on every screen. She packed slowly. The grenade USB. The Zippo. A single data crystal. Vink's thesis draft, titled The Strategic Value of Controlled Combustion. He found her at the shuttle bay, his bioluminescence scarred but bright. They will blame you. Erase your actions. Let them. She slung her bag over her shoulder. You know the truth, and the clarity. Zoe lit the Zippo, its flame a tiny enduring rebellion. Tell your Senate to ban spark plugs next. The shuttle's engines whined, drowning his reply. As Qu'lath Prime shrank to a sapphire marble, she wondered if redemption was a thing you earned or a thing you stole. Somewhere below, in the dark, a spark still burned.
Chapter 3. Qu'lath Prime's skies had turned the color of a bruise. Methane storms roiled above the academic spires, their swirling greens and yellows staining the crystalline towers with a sickly pallor. The Clarity's toxin had evolved, no longer a silent assassin but a butcher. They'd pumped the atmosphere full of flammable gas, daring the Qu'lath to choose between annihilation and surrender. To the Senate, the choice was simple. Extinction was preferable to violence. To Zoe and Nguyen, it was a math problem. She stood in the ruins of the terraforming lab, her boots crunching over shattered biopods and scorched circuitry. The air reeked of sulfur and something sharper, metallic, the tang of adaptive nanotech, the Clarity's signature. Vench hovered nearby, his bioluminescence muted beneath a borrowed human hazard suit, its visor fogged with his anxiety. He looked like a child playing astronaut, all gangly limbs and unsteady grace. The ignition grid, Zoe said, kneeling to trace a finger through the ash coating the floor. It's still intact. Vench pulsed a query through his suit's translator, the sound tinny and small. You mean to burn the methane? Control the burn. Herd their drones into the containment fields. She gestured to the skeletal remains of a atmospheric processor, its vents warped by heat, like the Venusian Turkey Shoot. But this time we cooked the meal, not the chefs. Vench mantle flushed out gray behind the visor. The Senate forbade it. The Accords don't mention wildfires. She pried open a maintenance panel, her hands moving on muscle memory. Reyes had taught her this, how to rewire a grenade's detonator mid-firefight, how to turn rubble into refuge. Improvisation is just strategy with its sleeves rolled up, he'd say. She could almost hear him now, laughing through the static of her memories. The ignition grid hummed to life, its hollow display flickering like a dying star. Zoe input the coordinates with deliberate slowness, each keystroke a silent apology. 23 names, a galaxy of ghosts. The grenade USB hung heavy around her neck, its cold weight a counterbalance to the feverish itch beneath her ribs. They moved through the methane fog like phantoms. The Clarity's drones haunted the periphery, half-seen shadows with too many joints, their forms blurred by adaptive camouflage. Zoe's lighter flickered in her palm, its tiny flame a lighthouse in the gloom. Vench trailed behind, clutching a jury-rigged EMP emitter like a talisman. The neural hubs are failing, he murmured, his voice frayed through the comms. The hive mind, it's fragmenting. They can't hold the evacuation routes much longer. Zoe didn't answer. Her mind was a map of intersecting vectors, wind speeds, gas densities, the precise millisecond when spark would meet fuel. She'd run the calculations 100 times, but numbers couldn't account for the Qu'lath's fragility. One misstep, and the fire would do what the Clarity couldn't, turn pacifists into ash. They reached the primary ignition node, a skeletal tower jutting from the ruins of a Qu'lath archive. The Clarity had been here. Blackened nutrient sacs littered the ground, their membranes split like overripe fruit. Zoe knelt, her gloves brushing a puddle of congealed biofluid. It shimmered faintly, still holding the ghost light of its host. You should go, she said, not looking at Vench. Override the safety protocols from the secondary node. I'll handle the rest. His bioluminescence flared, a burst of gold defiance. You need me here. What I need, she snapped, is someone alive to shut this down when it's done. The words hung between them, sharp and final. Vench's suit whined as he turned, tendrils pressing against the visor in a Qu'lath gesture Zoe had come to recognize. Part farewell, part benediction. Alone, Zoe climbed the tower. The rungs were slick with condensed methane, each step a gamble. Below, the fog thickened, swallowing the horizon. Somewhere in that void, the Clarity's fleet circled, patient as vultures. She reached the control hub, its interface crusted with ice. Her lighter sparked once, twice before catching. The flame trembled. Venusian trenches. Rhea's voice, raw from smoke. Light it, Z-bomb. Light it or we're all. She crushed the memory. Focused on the grid, a shadow moved in the fog. The Clarity's drone emerged like a nightmare given form. A humanoid shape sheathed in liquid metal. Its face a void where adaptive nanotech swirled. Zoe's lighter dipped, the flame guttering. You're supposed to be extinct, the drone intoned. Its voice a chorus of screams run through a filter. Zoe smirked. You're supposed to be a myth. It lunged. She dropped, rolling behind a coolant tank as the drone's claws screeched against metal. The lighter tumbled from her grip, skittering across the floor. The flame shrank to a blue ember. Dying. No. The drone loomed, its void face rippling. Your fire dies, human, and with it your. Zoe's fist closed around the grenade USB. She swung it like a blackjack, the metal edges biting into the drone's neck. Nanotech hissed, recoiling. The void face flickered, a flash of something human beneath. That's for Reyes, she spat, slamming the USB into the control hub's port. The ignition grid flared. Fire unspooled across the sky. Controlled burns, ravenous orange tongues, licking the methane into geometric patterns, hurting. The Clarity's drones into containment fields that shimmered like soap bubbles. Zoe watched from the tower, her breath ragged. The flames danced to her algorithm's tune, a waltz of heat and precision. Vench's voice crackled through the comms. Secondary node, compromised. Safety protocols, a burst of static. Zoe froze. Vench. No answer. Below the flames wavered. Without the secondary node's dampeners, the fire would spread, would consume. She ran. The secondary node was a crypt. Vench lay amidst shattered consoles, his hazard suit breached, bioluminescence leaking like liquid starlight. His tendrils trembled as they brushed the override panel, a tangle of Qu'lath biocircuitry and human wiring. Stupid squid, Zoe muttered, crouching beside him. Her hands shook as she spliced cables. Should have stayed gone. Vench mantle pulsed faintly. You called me family. She hadn't. Not aloud. The override panel sparked. Zoe's lighter flared, its flame kissing the contact points. The system shuddered, containment fields snapping taut. Above the fire bowed. They found her in the ashes. Ambassador chose enforcers, their faces hidden behind compliance masks. Zoe didn't resist. Let them cuff her, confiscate the USB, the lighter. Let them call her a rogue, a relic. Vench survived, barely. The Qu'lath medic said his bioluminescence would never fully return. A scar of dimmed gold, where there had once been radiant violet. He came to her cell the night before her tribunal, his tendrils sheathed in a medical exoskeleton. They're calling it the miracle on Qu'lath Prime, he pulsed, the translator flattening his irony. Zoe snorted. Miracles don't leave scars. He pressed a data crystal to the force field. Inside a single word glowed. Family. When they took her to the shuttle, she palmed the crystal, its edges sharp against her skin. The grenade USB was gone, but its weight remained. A phantom limb, a soldier's ghost. As the engines roared, she lit the Zippo one last time. The flame held steady, Somewhere below, in the soot-stained ruins, a Qu'lath scholar began drafting a new thesis. Redemption, it began, is a spark that outlives the fire. Chapter 4. Chapter 4. The Geometry of Dawn. The cell was a cube of shadows, its walls etched with the faint glyphs of Qu'lath penitence from eras when their concept of sin still required corporeal punishment. Zoe Nguyen traced the grooves with her fingertips, the carvings cool and damp under her touch. The air smelled of ozone and distant rain, the aftermath of the methane fires, still clinging to the planet's wounded atmosphere. Through a slit of a window, no wider than her palm, she watched the twin suns bleed into the horizon, their light fractured by the crystalline debris of the academic spires. Reconstruction drones flitted like wasps, their laser torches stitching the skyline back together. Beauty born of ruin, again. They'd taken her boots, her lighter, the grenade USB. All that remained was the data crystal Vench has slipped her. Family, its edges worn smooth from her restless thumb. She wondered if they'd let him keep his thesis, if the Senate had burned it, or if periwinkle streaks now colored their hive mind debates. Footsteps echoed in the corridor, too heavy for Qu'lath. Ambassador Cho's enforcers then. EarthGov's verdict had arrived. Zoe closed her eyes. The darkness behind her lids was not the void of space, nor the abyss of the Clarity's drones, but something softer, the quiet of a barracks after lights out, Ray's snoring in the bunk below, the USB's holographic names flickering, like fireflies. 23 ghosts. They'd grown quieter here, in the stillness. Or maybe she'd finally learned to listen. The door hissed open, 2 enforcers, their compliance masks reflecting her hollowed face. No words, they didn't touch her, just gestured with gloved hands. Come. She stood slowly, the crystal pressed to her palm. Let them think her broken. Let them think her tamed. The tribunal chamber was a wound of light. Sunbeams sliced through cracked crystal domes, pooling on the floor in jagged mosaics. The Qu'lath Senate floated in a semicircle, their bioluminescence muted to funeral indigo. Ambassador Cho stood at a human podium, her tailored suit stark against the organic curves of the room. Zoe Nguyen, Cho began, her voice polished steel. You stand accused of reckless endangerment, violation of the Mercy Accords, and saving their collective asses, Zoe muttered, a ripple through the Senate. One scholar's mantle flushed crimson, anger, or its closest approximation. Cho's smile tightened. Your actions, while initially effective, have jeopardized humanity's standing in the accord. The Qu'lath demand reparations. Your cooperation is recommended. Zoe studied the Senate. Their tendrils trembled, interlaced in a fragile web. Fear, not of her, but of the truth she'd forced them to swallow. We are not the gentle galaxy's darlings. We are survivors. You want a confession? Zoe's voice cut the humid air. Fine, I'd do it again. Cho's composure cracked. This isn't a joke. You've set us back decades. We were never moving forward. A chime sounded, liquid, resonant. The Senate parted, and Vint drifted into the chamber. He was a specter of his former self. His mantle, once vibrant violet, was a patchwork of dull gold and scar tissue. His tendrils sheathed in a medical exoskeleton that whirred softly with each movement. But his bioluminescence burned steady, a low, unwavering blue. The hive mind has reviewed the human's data, he pulsed, the translator stripping none of the grit from his tone. A hollow screen flickered to life, projecting the grenade USB's contents, not battle plans, but names. Reyes, Voss, Cole, 23 flickering ghosts. These are not weapons, Vint continued. They are reminders of the cost of fire. The Senate shuddered, their collective light dimming. Zoe's throat tightened. She hadn't realized the USB had synced to their neural archives, that her ghosts now walked among theirs. Ambassador Cho stepped forward, but a Qu'lath elder raised a trembling tendril. We have misjudged. Your mercy is not weakness. It is memory.
Zoe's laugh was a dry rasp. Memory doesn't stop bullets. No. Vink pulsed. But it shapes the hands that hold them. They released her at dusk. The embassy was deserted. EarthGov's envoys already fleeing the diplomatic fallout. Zoe found her lighter in a locked drawer. Its silver scuffed but unbroken. The flame leapt eagerly, defiantly. She climbed to the observatory, where the stars hung low, their light filtered through lingering methane scars. Below, the Qu'lath moved through the rebuilt spires, their bioluminescence now threaded with strands of human crimson, a silent homage, or a warning. Vink found her there, his exoskeleton clicking softly. They've revoked the accords. Drafted a new treaty. Vigilant peace, they're calling it. Zoe snorted. Catchy. He drifted to her side, tendril brushing the lighter's flame. You could stay. Teach them. Us. She thought of Reyes, of the way he'd grinned through the smoke of 100 battles. You're a shit diplomat, Zudbomb. I'm not a teacher, she said. You're a catalyst. The stars blurred. Zoe thumbed the data crystal, family burning against her skin. The shuttle awaited, its hull gleaming under alien suns. The new envoy from Earth stepped out, clutching olive branches in one hand, fire extinguishers in the other. Zoe smirked, balance however clumsy. Vink hovered at the tarmac's edge, his mantle shimmering with something like pride. Where will you go? She lit the Zippo, its flame steady in Qu'lath Prime's thin air, wherever the fires needed. As the engines roared, she glimpsed her reflection in the viewport, older, scarred, but unbroken. The grenade USB was gone, but its weight had settled somewhere deeper, a shard of shrapnel she'd learned to carry. Somewhere below, a Qu'lath scholar lit a candle. The starship dwindles to a speck. On Qu'lath Prime, Vink floats in the rebuilt neural hub, his thesis glowing above a terminal. The hologram shifts, a human hand, clasping a Qu'lath tendril, flames curling around them, gentle as breath. Redemption is a spark that outlives the fire. Zoe's lighter flares in the dark, a tiny enduring sun.